I'm live, man. Sunday, March 14th. We are the morning after, the afternoon after. Chocolatito versus Estrada 2. And what a classic fight it was. Make sure to hit that sub button as you come in. Hit the like button. Please hit the like button. And also, man, hit me up on YouTube or Twitter if you're on there. Calix Boxing 2. Matter of fact, let me get that. Is it too late to get that information up? Let me put that ticker up right there. That's where you can find me. So hit that like button as you come in. I wanted to talk about Chocolatito versus Estrada, the aftermath, and everybody knows firsthand how I feel about Chocolatito as a fighter. Just an incredible fighter, incredible human being, and it was great to see him further cement his legacy last night, despite what you felt of the scorecards. And let me just get to that right off the bat. I had Chocolatito winning the fight 116, 112. Full disclaimer, I picked Chocolatito to win the fight last week during my pre-fight analysis, and I also bet on Chocolatito to win this fight. I bet on him to win the fight. So it's tough I said that, I alluded to that on Twitter last night. It's tough when you win a bet, but you lose a bet. And everybody knows what I mean by that. And if you bet on boxing, it's why betting on boxing is tough, because there are so many outside influences to this, to where you can get some bad scorecards and a winner of a fight can become a loser of a fight. And I'll get to the scorecards in a minute. Shout out G Funky. I saw G Funky scorecard 115, 113 for Estrada, and I'm gonna get to that in a minute because I don't think that's a bad scorecard, to be honest. Although I had Chocolatito winning the fight, um, I could see where you could get to that. Um, Chocolatito, I felt incredible performance, um, incredible fight, and that's what I expected coming in, right? Like if you watch the pre-fight analysis I said that I felt the career arc of both of these guys was going in the same direction. I didn't agree with this narrative that Chocolatito was plateauing. I felt people were reading too much into the Sorong Vise knockout loss. I felt like their career arc was the same. The narrative, like I said, was Estrada was still going up, Chocolatito was plateauing, and this was Estrada's time. I just didn't buy into that narrative. I felt like Chocolatito was going to win this fight, much like he won the first fight, but in a more exciting fashion, being that both of these guys are older. Both of these guys are fighting for legacy even more so. And as you're 9 years older, 8 years older, whatever it is, your reflexes are a little bit diminished. So you're either going to become more cagey, where you get more boring, or if you cut from these guys' cloth and you're warriors, you're going to get more exciting, because the diminished reflexes leads to you getting hit more, and it leads to you exchanging more. And that's what happened in this fight. And to say these guys are diminished, not much. They're not diminished very much from what they were 8, 9 years ago. Even to this day, late in their careers, both great fighters, and both first ballot Hall of Famers. They both should be first, particularly Chocolatito. But Estrada, what he did last night was he cemented his legacy as a guy who will always be synonymous with Chocolatito. When you mention Chocolatito's name, you can no longer mention his name without Estrada right there. When you put Chocolatito in the Hall of Fame, Estrada's name will be right there with him as a guy he had to get past, a guy who was right there with him throughout 24 rounds. So props to Estrada for that. I'm not going to come on here and knock Estrada at all. That guy's a hell of a fighter. What he did last night was incredible. I just had Chocolatito winning the fight, 8-4. And what was interesting about this, ironic, is I felt the scorecards in the first fight were bad toward Estrada. They had a 118, 110, and I forgot what the other two read in the first fight for Chocolatito. But that was a close fight, the first fight. Estrada was right there with Chocolatito. And then the second fight, I feel like it was inverse. I feel like the scorecards were unfair to Chocolatito. But on my scorecard, I had both fights 116, 112 for Chocolatito. I had both of them scored the same. I just felt like the second fight, obviously much more exciting, and Estrada had better moments in the fight to where you could say, oh, I could see where you could have Estrada winning that fight. But I still felt like Chocolatito won 8 rounds in both fights. I have some notes written down because I didn't want to mess this up, man. It's such a great fight, so much to talk about. But Texas, you always have to worry about something like this with Texas because there's always a score. If you watch the whole card, there was a bad scorecard in every single fight, pretty much, that went to decision. You always have to worry about that in Texas. Something with the referee, whatever it is. But let's talk about scoring real quick. I had it 8 rounds to 4 for Chocolatito. However, the reason I think you could get to 115, 113 Estrada, and let's get this out the way, the 117, 111 for Estrada, I think we all agree, terrible scorecard. Terrible, terrible scorecard. There's no way you can watch that fight and give 9 rounds to Estrada. However, I think you could get to 7. And the reason I say that is, although I had 8 rounds for Chocolatito, there were 3 swing rounds, and I wrote them down. I forgot what particular rounds they were, but I wrote down some notes as I was scoring the fight, and I don't have them in front of me. But there were 3 rounds in particular. I scored the round for Chocolatito because I felt he was a more aggressive fighter, and he was landing the tougher, harder, more effective punches in those particular rounds. So I gave those 3 close rounds, and they were, when I say close, they were razor tight. Like if Teddy Atlas was scoring these fights, and we all know from watching ESPN Friday Night Fights, if Teddy Atlas was scoring these fights, there would have been like 4 or 5 draw rounds, right? So that's how close some of these rounds were. But there were 3 in particular on my scorecard that I said, man, I gave that round to Chocolatito because he was the effective aggressor, the more effective, harder puncher in that round. I felt like if I was one of these 2 fighters, I would have rather been him in that round using the Max Kellerman criteria. He always judges rounds on who would he have rather been in that round. In all 3 rounds, I would have rather have been Chocolatito. However, I remember writing down, like, I could see how somebody could make a good argument for Estrada in that round. And there were 3 rounds that I gave to Chocolatito that if you give the benefit of the doubt to Estrada, he did some good things in those rounds to where I could say, you know what, I could give that round to Estrada. Somebody could talk me off of Chocolatito there in that round and get me to give Estrada that round. That's how close those 3 rounds were. So that's why there's a difference between controversial and debatable, right? And I felt this fight was more debatable than controversial. And it's tough for me to say that as a Chocolatito fan because as I was watching this fight, as I scored it, 10-point must system through 12 rounds. And as I'm just watching the fight in its entirety, from both points of view, I felt like Chocolatito was the better fighter last night. If I would have just not been scoring the fight and just watching it, I would have felt Chocolatito was the better fighter in the fight that night. So it's tough for me to get on here and say, you know what, I can see where you get Estrada in a 10-point must system going through 12 rounds. But it's just tough for me to do that because, man, Chocolatito is everything that's right about boxing. Estrada too. But I felt like he's a guy who gets the short end of the stick in a lot of ways in his career. Like when we were having the debate, and that's why I always bring this up about fighter of the decade. When people were having the debates of who was the fighter of the decade from 2010 to 2019, Chocolatito's name seemed to be like somewhere in the distance, like 3rd or 4th or 5th or maybe even 6th. You would have guys like Mayweather, Ward, Pacquiao. You'd have these guys names mentioned, but Chocolatito was somewhere off on the side, it felt like. And from my point of view, when you have a guy who fights 26 times in a decade, wins 20 of them by knockout, arguably only lost 1 fight in that decade, the second fight to Sorong Vise by knockout because I felt like he won the first fight. And that's another thing that kind of gets under my skin is Chocolatito, if you give him that first fight against Sorong Vise, maybe he doesn't need to rematch Rungvisai in the second fight, and he doesn't have a loss there. And then if you give him this win last night against Estrada, which I strongly feel he deserved, we're not talking about a trilogy, perhaps, even though I would have still argued for a trilogy as a fan because I want to see more of what I saw last night. Even if you give it to Chocolatito and he's up 2-0, I would still want to see a third fight. That's how great I thought Estrada was last night, and how great I thought these guys two guys were together last night, because boxing can be sort of like a dance. Like, even though the guys are competing against each other, guys can still make beautiful music together, and that's what happened last night. That was just an incredible fight. It's gonna be tough to beat that for fight of the year. It's gonna be tough, man. One judge had it. Yeah, that's the card I was alluding to. That's like the 117, 111. It's very similar to the 117, 111 last night, because that 118, 110 in the first fight was an awful scorecard. I thought that, like, that first fight, and that, I want to touch on that too about last night, is Chocolatito got heated up and got that blood flow and the sweat going earlier in the fight than I expected. That's one part of this fight that I was wrong about. Is if you watch the first fight, you can argue that Estrada won the first 3 rounds in that first fight. And that's why I think the scorecards were so bad. I felt like every round in the first fight, they were pretty much giving the benefit of the doubt to Chocolatito, which can happen in a fight like that. We have a guy with a bigger name and a champion. But in this fight last night, Chocolatito got heated up in that second round. You can tell he wasn't going to make the same mistake in the first fight that he made in the first fight, where he let Estrada really get it going early in the fight. Even though he got the benefit of the doubt on the scorecards, he wasn't going to make that same mistake, and made that adjustment to where he was going to get it going earlier in this fight. And he did. Second round, you started to see him get it going. And I don't know, man. I just feel strongly that Chocolatito win this fight. I could still see how you could get to 115, 113 Estrada. I don't think that's a bad scorecard by any means. But I think you got to give the benefit of the doubt to Estrada in every close round to get to that point. Let's talk about debatable versus controversial. I don't buy into the narrative as well that if a fight is close, it can't be controversial. Because there's fights, I wish I could give specific examples off the top of my head, but there are fights where it's 115, 113 on all 3 scorecards for a certain guy. But you could call it controversial because what if all 12 rounds were easy to score and the other guy won 8 of the rounds closely, but all 3 judges give 7 rounds to the other guy? That's controversial in my opinion, even though it's only like a 2-point swing, a 2-round swing. To me, that's controversial. There's a difference between controversial and debatable. To me, this felt debatable because as I'm watching this fight and I'm making my notes, I'm like, okay, that round I gave to Chocolatito, but that was tight. Like, that was a tight round. And then a couple rounds later, I gave that one to Chocolatito. I felt he was the effective aggressor. I felt like he was landing the harder shots, the more effective shots. I felt like the round was going the way Chocolatito wanted it to go. I would rather have been him in that round, but I could see where you could make a case for Estrada in that round. Let's see how D-Style had. I scored at 115 last night, draw this morning, but watched it again. Yeah, so you watched it 3 times. I've only watched it once. And I had it 116, 112 Chocolatito. 8 rounds to 4. But as I was saying earlier in the podcast, 3 rounds for me. And I wish I had my notes that I took last night in front of me there in the other room. I should have brought them out with me, but I forgot which particular 3 rounds those were. Round 9, I remember it was one of them. But I said to myself, I had Chocolatito winning that round, but I could see where you give that to Estrada. And that's why I think you could get to 115, 113. One of unofficial scorecard I saw somebody have, though, that I didn't agree with, they had 115, 113 for Estrada. And I know who that person is. I'm not going to call him out by name. They're on the YTBC, but they had rounds 6 through 11 all for Estrada. And I don't think you could get to that. There was no point in this fight where either fighter won 6 straight rounds. Just no. So no. There was never a point where a fighter took that much control of this fight. It was just, I'll take this, then the other fighter comes right back, and then the other fighter comes right back. It was just a give and take. And that's what these guys made beautiful music last night. They made a beautiful dance. Both guys are first ballot Hall of Famer. Chocolatito cemented his legacy even further last night with this performance. He is not washed up. I'm not buying that narrative, especially now after the Soran Vise KO loss. That guy is still a great fighter, which is saying something, what he's been through. And I keep going back to this, man. He was the fighter of the decade from 2010 to 2019. There is no other argument. He was the fighter of the decade. 26 fights, 20 KOs, and he won titles in 3 different weight classes in that decade. He was the fighter of the decade. Stop shortchanging this guy. Chocolatito won round. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you watch that round 12, and it was sort of like Teofimo Lopez-esque, where Chocolatito said, "This is my night. You're not taking it from me here." And what was interesting, though, is Estrada came out strong. I felt like in the beginning of the beginning 30 seconds, 45 seconds of that 12th round, and then Chocolatito said, "Nope, my night." And he took over that 12th round. And I felt he hurt him too in that round. Another interesting thing is when we're talking about scoring this fight, and there's another reason I strongly feel like Chocolatito won this fight, is between rounds 10 and rounds 11, Estrada's corner was telling him he was losing the fight and he needed a knockout. Right? Also, if you watch when they read the decision for this fight, if you watch that, Estrada looked surprised. His trainer started to go back and watch that. His trainer started to put his arm around Estrada, and it looked to me like he started to console him a little bit. He was starting to console him, and then when that last scorecard was read and Estrada's name was read, when it said Mexico, and he knew he won the fight, he looked surprised to me. He looked surprised. I don't know. He just looked surprised to me. And his trainer looked surprised. So you put all that together. It didn't look to me like Estrada's team felt he won this fight. And you could go back and watch between rounds 10 and 11. His corner is clearly telling him, you're losing this fight. Maybe a strategy. I don't know. But I like to think they're being honest with their fighter. They were clearly telling him, we're down on these cards. You need a knockout. He said that multiple times in the corner. The trainer told Estrada, you're losing this fight. You need a knockout. After the fight, when the scorecards are being announced, he's consoling his fighter with his arm around him. Estrada's name is read as the winner. Estrada has that split second of honesty right there in his face where he's surprised. He's like, oh, okay. I'm the winner. You know, and that I think that tells the story right there. I just don't think Estrada won this fight. I think Chocolatito won the fight. Is it a robbery? No, I think that's a reach. But I think if you ask 10 people, 9 out of 10 will tell you they had Chocolatito winning the fight. So when there's that much of a disparity, though, it sort of walks the line of debatable versus controversial, right? Because when there's that much of a disparity, when you have 90% of the public saying one fighter won, and then 66.6% of the judges, of those 3 judges, feel like the other guy won. Judging, man. It's a tough job, though. And I feel bad for the judges last night because they had a tough job, because there were a lot of tough rounds to score. There were. So just to wrap it up, debatable decision. I sort of lean towards debatable, not controversial, but I strongly feel like Chocolatito won the fight. Strongly feel like he won the fight. Now, do we want the trilogy, or do we want Soran Vise versus Estrada first, and then Estrada versus Chocolatito? I want Estrada versus Chocolatito 3 first. I want the trilogy first before we go on to Sor Rungvisai, because you watch Sor Rungvisai fight Friday night, man, that guy is still a terror. And he's still a tough matchup for both fighters. If you watch Rungvisai versus Estrada, the second fight, there were a lot of tactical mistakes that Rungvisai made in that second fight with Estrada. And I feel like there are a lot of improvements that Rungvisai can make going into that third fight that it could possibly ruin an Estrada versus Chocolatito third fight. I don't want to see that fight with either guy coming off of a loss to another fighter. I'd rather them jump straight to it. In the zone, Eddie Hearn last night was saying this is the best fight he's ever seen in person live. Do it again. Do it again. Come on, let's just get to this fight again. Let's get to the trilogy. Like I said, I feel bad that Chocolatito gets the short end of the stick and has to try to avenge a loss again that I feel like he shouldn't have to avenge, because I feel like he didn't lose the fight, much like the first Rungvisai fight. But Rungvisai, man, if you watch him fight Friday night, early Saturday morning, he's going to be a tough out for either guy. He's still a tough matchup for Chocolatito and Estrada as well, because there are a lot of improvements he can make going into that third fight that he didn't take advantage of in that second fight. So Rungvisai, man, if you're going to go to that fight, you better hold your breath and hope Estrada gets through it, because if Rungvisai were to knock out Estrada or beat him soundly, then that could possibly throw a monkey wrench into a third fight between Estrada versus Chocolatito. So just go straight to it, man. Rungvisai is tremendous shape, and then cutting the ring off, it makes easy in combination with 90 punch. Yeah. I mean, Rungvisai is the full fighter, man. Full fighter. Amazing performance. And I just thought it was an amazing performance by Chocolatito. Given the circumstances, I bet on him. He was plus 183. I didn't think he was a 2-1 underdog in this fight. I just didn't see it. There was a lot of value in Chocolatito winning this fight. Too much value to pass up. And it kills me that I couldn't cash out on that because of the judges' scorecards. It kills me because he won the fight. He won the fight. But 2-1 underdog, he was undervalued. They're still doing him dirty. Still undervaluing him as a fighter, but great performance by Chocolatito, but also a great performance by Estrada in making sure that his name will always be synonymous with a legendary fighter, an all-time great in Chocolatito, by staying with him through 12 rounds once again. So great job by Estrada. As far as the fight, real quick, the thing that is magical to me about Chocolatito, and much is made about his punching power, how great precision combination puncher. He can place him wherever he wants to place him. Great counter puncher as well. But how does he set up those counters, and how does he set up the combination punches? It was a beautiful exchange in the round in the fight. I don't remember what round it was. I think it was somewhere in the middle of the fight, middle rounds, where Estrada threw a 4-punch combination, and Chocolatito just barely moved his head like this, back and forth, just bobbed it a little bit, and made Estrada miss this much with each punch. And then when Estrada was done throwing that 4th punch, he threw his combination and landed with all 3 punches. And I said, that's Chocolatito right there. That's what makes that guy great. With all the other great assets the guy has, the balls, the heart, everything, that sweet science right there is what makes that guy great. I mean, he just barely moved his upper body, just enough to make Estrada miss with all 4 punches, and then landed with 3 of his own. It was just, I mean, he barely missed him, and then landed with 3 of his own. I said, damn, that's a bad man right there. That is a bad man right there. I gave the 2nd, 5th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 12th round of Chocolatito. A couple of these are close calls, but the same in another 2 rounds I gave to Estrada. I had it a draw. And I'm seeing that as well, a draw in the fight. I just don't understand these scorecards who I've seen 1 or 2 people who had the Estrada sweeping the middle rounds and into the championship rounds. I just didn't see that. I didn't see that at all. Round 9 was close. I think it was 6 and 7 that I clearly gave Chocolatito. So I didn't see anybody take over the fight that much to where they could sweep 5 or 6 rounds in a row to where you give it to Estrada. And just to recap, if you had it 115, 113 Estrada, I can't be mad because I feel like you could talk to me about that. And, I could say I could see it because I had 3 rounds very close myself that I gave the Chocolatito. But I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt to Estrada in pretty much every close round to get to that point. And in order to do that, I think you have to have possibly some sort of bias towards Estrada to get there. But you can still get there. 117, 111 is a non-starter, though. You can't get there. So I'm going to wrap this thing up, man. Just to say it one more time. Props to both fighters. This is what boxing is about. And somebody said it on Twitter. I wish I could acknowledge them here and give them credit for it. But when boxing has 4, 5, 6 nights a year when it's great like this, when the stars align, when two great fighters decide they're going to fight each other and they both just bring it and they both have great nights. And when that happens, boxing can't be touched by anything. I would argue, I'm a fan of multiple sports. I would argue that football, basketball are consistently better than boxing. But when boxing is at its best, how it was last night, there's nothing that can touch it. Nothing that can touch it. And it has to be two great fighters going at each other, deciding they're going to fight each other. And then when they get in the ring, they go for it. Not like a Mayweather-Pacquiao where we were disappointed. When two great warriors decide, we're going to figure this out tonight, and they get in the ring and they try to figure it out. That's what happened last night. Neither guy wanted to give each other an inch. Neither guy wanted to give up an inch of their legacy. Both guys wanted to go down as better than the other. Both guys wanted to go down as a first ballot Hall of Famer. Both guys wanted to go down as top 100, top 200 of all time. It was that sort of fight to where both guys just wanted to bring the best out of themselves, and they brought out the best in each other. That's competition. That's boxing at its best. That's beautiful, man. Just beautiful. Props to and how poetic that it happened on the night that Marvin Hagler died. Rest in peace. Another video tomorrow on that because I really want to get that one right. But the death of one of the all-time great warriors in modern boxing history, the generation prior to this one, a giant in the game. So for this fight to happen on the same night, it's an honor to really just watch it. Just watch guys who are great just go at it. And yeah, I think this is the comment to end it right here. Chocolatito, all-time great. No other way to put it except that. Chocolatito is an all-time great. I felt he won the fight, 116, 112. Props to Estrada as well. Get straight to the trilogy. Get straight to the trilogy. Soro and Vise, as great as he is, I want him to wait in line. I want to get these guys back at it again. Get us the trilogy right away. I'm out, man. God bless. Y'all have a good Sunday.